Thank you for joining us for a Q&A for the movie TEARSUCKER. I'm sitting with the writer, the director, some of the stars of this film. I'm Kristen Fuse. I'm a professor at Woodbury University. I also did a little bit of script consulting on this wonderful film, and so I'm really happy to lead us in conversation to talk a little bit more about it today.
Yes, thank you for that, by the way.
Yeah. So first question is for Sam. Where did the idea for this film come from?
Well, I think the genesis of the idea came from an evening that Alice and I were actually watching a movie together. Something happened in the film that was a bit of a trigger for some stuff that she's been through in her past that has nothing related to anything that happens in the movie. It's just, everybody's got their stuff, and this was one of her things, and I didn't really know, or I wasn't fully aware, and she got upset, and I felt so awful about it. And, I more than anything want to protect her and protect people. And I felt like, oh man, I wish I would have known that this is a thing that like pushes your button and triggers you. And she said something like, you didn't know, it's not your fault. And I remember thinking, well, I'll remember this for the future. And then right after that, I thought, wow, that's a really powerful thing to know about somebody, and that's a lot of responsibility, knowing something like that right away like digs into the fabric of who someone is and all their experience and everything. And I just started thinking about like, with great power comes great responsibility, as the quote goes. And I thought a bad person or a person with bad intentions could easily use that to manipulate someone and just push that button, the saying pushing people's buttons, like they could push that button anytime they wanted to get a response. And I think the general idea kind of came out of that. And I just kind of saw the film, I don't know, almost immediately, and it just pretty quickly came together. I think that's the basic genesis of the idea. There was a lot of other things that compiled to it, like things I've worked on and, stuff from my own life and other things. But I think that was the catalyst. I was actually trying to write something else, and it wasn't, I think it was about like finding Forrest Fenn's treasure or something. And it just was not coming together. And it's funny, like sometimes you stumble on something and you can just, like I literally could see the whole movie. So at that point, it was just a matter of like getting it out of my head onto paper. And initially I leaned into some more of a more kind of sci-fi tone about some different elements, especially with Tom's android obsession and, all of that. And then once Steven and I started talking about it, the script got reshaped a little bit, and we focused on like what was the most interesting about Tom's character and about the relationship, and like what was the kind of movie that we wanted to make and tell. And then it took shape further from there. But yeah, the initial idea came from thinking about the responsibility that you have when you know someone's stuff and like, know how to push their buttons or what to do to get them to have some kind of an emotional response.
So Steven, it sounds like you came on board pretty early in the project then. What attracted you to this script or this idea?
Well, yeah, I think Sam brought the script to me maybe like 3 or 4 months before we filmed. It honestly wasn't that long before we got everything up. But what attracted me about the story, I generally like anything about crazy people, psychopaths, manipulative people. Like that's a topic that's very interesting to me because it's so not what I am, as far as like a manipulator. Like I'm a very empathetic person, right, which is kind of the opposite of what Tom is. He doesn't feel for other people. So it's just like trying to get in that headspace of Tom's character to give, Sam some direction and feedback on the script and stuff. That's like an incredible challenge for me, but one that's like very rewarding, just to like try to get outside of yourself for a minute and see the world through somebody else's perverse eyes. Yeah.
Allison, what about you? When did you come on board this film, and what attracted you to playing a character like Lily?
I mean, I think you wrote it knowing it was for me. So I think I was kind of on board from the inception of it. I also realized that people watching this might not know that Sam and I were in a relationship before this movie. So as he mentioned with, watching the film together and stuff, I feel very safe working with Sam. And when I first read this script and saw like the level of vulnerability and emotion that was needed, at first I was terrified because it's a lot, and it's a lot of really intense subjects that I knew I'd want to handle with care, but also knew I'd be doing it not only with someone that I feel super safe with, but also with a team that I am very comfortable with and know. When Sam first told me about the project, I actually was on a road trip with Danielle. We're also best friends in real life. We were driving from Maine to California, and we had just left Maine, and I was on the phone with Sam, and he said, I have this script idea. I'm going to finish a draft by the time you get home, which was 5 days. And I was like, okay, good luck. And I got home and he had finished it. So that first draft came really fast. But I remember when you told me just the very broad strokes on the phone. We were in the car for this long road trip. And I like went down a rabbit hole on the internet searching tear fetish. And I think it's dacrophilia is what it's called. But they're like real people, and obviously not at the level of Tom, but there are people who, a lot of them are people who don't experience emotions deeply themselves and are fascinated. Sometimes it's not sexual, sometimes it is, by people crying. And I just remember like reading it and going, oh my gosh, this is a whole subject that is interesting to explore. That's kind of how I got home. And it, like you said, we moved really fast. It was like 3 months later we shot the thing. So it happened quickly.
So it sounds like you did a little bit of research, but did you do anything else special to prepare for the role of playing Lily? Like, what were some of the challenges that came along with playing a character who's experienced such deep trauma and abuse in her life?
Yeah. Like I said, I was really intimidated when I first read this because it felt like, it's interesting you said the word responsibility, but it feels like a huge responsibility because obviously this is a character, but this is a real life thing that happens to people. And I know that there's going to be people that have watched this movie or will watch this movie that have experienced physical abuse or emotional abuse or mental abuse. So the first thing I did was a lot of research. I read journals and articles about the psychology of the abuse cycle, about, the PTSD that can come with that when you do leave. And actually a lot of TED Talks. TED Talks were very valuable. And then Stephen and Sam gave me actually a lot of liberty with the vlog monologue that Sam or Tom is so obsessed with in the movie. They said I could kind of have some liberty to play with that. So I actually used working on that as a journaling exercise. So I spent a lot of time trying to get into Lily's head. Because as Sam's mentioned, and part of what spurred this is I do have some of my own trauma. Mine is very different from Lily's. And I also, everyone prepares differently. But personally, I do not like to use any sort of real life emotions, experiences, memories in my work. I find that for me, that doesn't feel safe or healthy to do. And so I like to keep everything super separate. So I built a whole, story for Lily. And one of the things I did for that, that my poor therapist probably thought was very unconventional. But my therapist specializes in people with trauma, PTSD. She does somatic work. And somatic work typically is modalities used to, when we store emotions and trauma in our body, to release that and to figure out how we are feeling things. And so I was very curious, with different types of trauma, like how that's held differently and how we would feel differently. So I asked her if we could set up a session. And at first she was a little bit confused, but we'd been working together for a while and she felt comfortable. And I asked her a lot of questions, obviously not, anything about real clients, but just about how that sort of physical abuse and that cycle would manifest in someone, and going through some parts of the script, asked her a lot of questions. And then by the end of that, we actually worked through the monologue together. And I think she has a special thank you in the credits because she was just so helpful with helping me see kind of the inner workings of that kind of brain. And what's interesting is I drove straight from that therapy session to our other producer Robert's house to film the very first thing I shot for the movie, which was that monologue. We shot that during pre-production. So that was like the very first take was that like very long thing we did. But so that really helped, like having that kind of deep conversation with her right before we went into filming that very heavy scene.
So Danielle, how did you approach Deb's relationship to Lily, kind of considering where the characters are in their relationship when the film starts, and the fact that you guys aren't really ever in the same scenes together?
Yeah, I think not until the last scene of the movie are we on screen together, which is actually kind of crazy when you think about it. But luckily, Allison is my best friend. And so I didn't really have to reach that far for the care and the worry, because we've known each other for the better part of a decade now, more like nearing 20. It's kind of weird to think about. And we've kind of seen each other at the highest highs, lowest lows. And I think it's like Allison said, I don't really like to pull from real visceral moments in my life to get those moments. But thinking about Allison in danger definitely made it easy to access that moment with my husband outside of the car, like, get your ass in the car, because like it's easy to feel that anxiety and that love for someone when it's already there, you know. So I approached it pretty realistically. We actually shot all my scenes in one day, except for the desert stuff, but all of my phone calls happened in one day, and Allison was there on set on the other end of the call, and so it was really just like any phone call that I would have with my best friend, you know, and obviously I may not have given the same advice Deb gave. I think some of her advice is a little sketchy, but, you know, I think it was easy for me to access that relationship. Probably the easiest role I've ever had to play.
Good.
Just a love. Yeah.
So one thing that stands out to me about this film is just how profoundly isolated Lily is, right? She works from home, she eats lunch by herself, her only friend lives far away, so they can only talk to each other on the phone. I wonder if maybe both of you could talk about the importance of that friendship to the characters in the movie and the evolution of the story.
Yeah, I mean, we made this sort of like right out of COVID lockdown, not too long after at least. And I think we all sort of got that experience of like, I'm in my apartment, I have to work really hard to reach out to people and tell someone I'm not okay. And I think that's something that a lot of people struggle with. Even if you're surrounded by people, sometimes the isolation is more than just like who's actually physically around you. But I think we're both lucky in that we have a great support system of women in our life that, you know, truly make us feel like so supported and so loved. And I don't know, honestly, what I would do in LA without that. It's so important to me and not something I've always had. So yeah, I think, I don't know. I love my friends.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. No, I mean, we're very incredibly lucky. I was going to add that I think one of the things I liked about this relationship that you wrote is that this is a piece of female friendship that I don't always feel like is shown on screen, is that it's not just like everything is peachy. And especially as we get a little older and big life changes start to happen, like people get in relationships or they move away or people start having babies, and like people can feel very left behind, and that can be really isolating. And I think there's also, especially with Lily, I think is very dependent on Deb and that desperation to get that validation and that support from her, and then having to find that on her own. And those differences that come up in the meantime, I think it's obviously also well known that in abuse situations, people often push away the people closest to them and are forced to. And I think that had happened with Tyler, Lily's ex-boyfriend character, and I think happens again with Tom in a different way. And so showing that cycle and how that affects a friendship, but how ultimately what really matters is those big values and people showing up. And, you know, maybe Deb is not as available to talk on FaceTime because she's on date night, but it doesn't mean she won't fight for her friend when push comes to shove, you know? So I think showing that is really beautiful, and how friendships can evolve and go through different phases. But it's the core stuff that matters.
So, Sam, you're not just the writer of this film, you also act in it, right?
True.
Are there challenges in taking the character that you wrote for the page and moving him to the screen?
Yeah, definitely, because I think anytime that you, as an actor, have a role in a script and you're preparing it for the film, there's in your head what you think you're going to do and how it feels. And then when you get to set, sometimes you try it and it's like exactly how you thought it was going to go. You did all your choreography and your homework and it's like, yep, this is how I saw it. And other times you get there and it just doesn't feel right, or it just doesn't work, or the director wants something else and then you have to adjust. And I tried to compartmentalize myself on this as much as I could. So like once we got to set, I'm no longer the writer, I am the actor, and like I trust Steven implicitly, and I just kind of put the performance in his hands at that point. And again, I'd done my preparation. I knew what I wanted to do as him, but ultimately, like, I'm trusting Steven for what he's seeing behind the camera and what feels authentic to him for the character, and am I taking it in the right direction, and do my choices for the scene work. So once we started filming, I just kind of left a lot of it in up to him to tell me, is it working, is it not? And I tried to separate myself from the script at that point, because when you're making any movie, as they say, there's the script you write, the script you shoot, the script you edit. Like, things are going to change throughout the process. So I tried not to be too married to anything that was in the script. And if our first cut of the film was like over 2 hours. So not only did we have to cut stuff from the script, but then we had to cut a bunch of stuff that we shot, and you can't be precious about that. You just have to let go of it. So I tried to let go of my writing hat as much as I could once we got to set, and was try to just be a performer on set, doing my job, playing the character, and taking what Steven was giving me for direction and going with it.
Let's talk a little bit more about that character of Tom.
Okay.
Whether you call it a kink or a fetish or a psychosis or whatever you call it, where did the idea come from to make Tom sort of so driven by this attraction to women's tears?
I think, Allison touched on a little bit before. I never really thought of it as a kink or a fetish, and I know those are just descriptors, but I came from it from a place of more thinking about like traits of what we call toxic masculinity that are so pervasive amongst a lot of men, and like an inability to express emotion, or just they never learned how. And a lot of times not being able to express emotion, like you see in kids, turns into frustration and anger and resentment. And so I think it came from, in part, thinking about those things and how those would manifest. And, also there's Tom's, I don't even know if obsession is the right word. Like, he, believes that he's an android. He's even got like, his, what he calls his birthmark, his stamp from the factory, essentially. And in his mind, he is not able to feel anything. And so he has to steal it from someone. So when he wakes up in the morning, goes to bed at night, or, as he said, he doesn't sleep, he's just thinking about, how can I feel something from someone? And his way of feeling things is by taking someone's tears. And with him, it's literal, but it's also a metaphor for emotional vampires and everybody. Like, a vampire needs to feed on blood to survive. And for him, he kind of has to feed on emotions to feel anything and survive. So I never really thought of it as a fetish. It's just like, something that he has to have because he can't do it on his own. And, it's not sexualized at all. Like, even though he has sex in the film, it's just a tool to get what he wants out of it. And I think, like everyone else, I both did a lot of research into the nature of abusive, manipulative relationships, and I've also worked on a bunch of other projects that kind of delved into these things. And a lot of times the abuser, even if there's sexual acts involved, like, that's not what they get their gratification out of. It's about power, and it's about control, and it's about manipulation. So for me, those were always the pervasive driving forces behind him. And, if there's anything sexual about any of it, it's just a tool to get what he really wants.
Zena, I thought you were going to answer this question with something related to how good a crier Allison is on film. And you're a really good crier.
That's honestly, that's a part of it. So Allison and I were both cast in a pandemic movie together, and, she had to sob a lot in that film. And so watching her do it, I was just always so impressed that this is a skill that she had. And, so when I was writing this, I wrote it for her because I had already seen what a talented performer she is, and I knew that she could play the role and for all the other reasons. But also, she can make the tears go, which is a fundamental part of the character. And, that's another thing that Tom looks for is he wants a crier. And she's a crier, so there you go.
She's very good. So even though you say sort of Tom's behavior isn't driven by sex, I wonder if we can talk about the sex scene that
Oh,
you
God.
filmed. It is, and actually maybe you should pass the mic to Allison for this one, because it's one thing to shoot a sex scene and all of the awkwardness that comes along with that. It's another to know that the scene is going to be like Sam just going to town on your face like you're an ice cream cone, right? Can you?
That's awful.
It's awful.
Yeah.
It's delightful, but I mean,
Yeah.
there's a special kind of awkwardness in this particular sex scene. I
Sure.
would say. Can you talk about how you prepared for it?
Well, I don't know that I prepared for it. But, there was also like other layers of awkwardness in that, Sam and I are together in real life. Also, most of the crew are our friends and we are all people that hang out together. And so it was extra weird to be like, oh, this is also my real life partner. And like our buddy is sitting over there like holding the boom and somebody else is like texting on their phone while I like pretend to orgasm. Like it's just a very weird situation. Also knowing that my family will see this movie. And also I'm like, this is not what he's like in real life. He's very kind and not a psychopath. But so, yeah, I mean, I think it was interesting to me that scene. I don't know, this is probably a vulnerable thing to say, but I've been in situations where like I've cried during or after sex because there's just such a release. And I had imagined for Lily that she has not had that experience or even any sort of human contact in so long. And we really barely even see them kiss in the movie before that scene happens. So just the real overwhelm of like everything that's happening coming to the surface at once. But yeah, definitely bizarre. I will say I don't know if it was better or worse that the person licking my face was someone that like I kiss regularly, but definitely we had our makeup artist Carrie was wonderful and was constantly on standby with like wipes and like sanitizing things because it was, and you always mouthwash, I will give you that. But yes, it was definitely a strange thing to film.
I will add that I do remember on set before and after the scenes there were a couple of times where I think more for me afterwards, I would say like, it's not me, it's the character. Yes. It's not me doing this. Let's remember, like, this is fictional. It's not really me. Or it would be a version of her saying like, I know it's not really you. This is just pretend, but still it is, like she said, I don't know if it's better or worse knowing someone because, same with my scenes with Emily, like, licking the tears off of someone's face is just not comfortable for anyone. It's not comfortable for me doing it. It's not comfortable for them to have it happen. So, Emily and I had a lot of trust with each other and, talked about everything. And I made sure that she was as comfortable as she could be with what we're doing. But it's still just weird. And, it's the same with Allison. It was weird in a different way. But it's just weird. And there's no way that it's not going to be weird. So I think I just tried to use any of that awkwardness and inherent like bizarreness of it to just enhance how like awful it feels to watch it happening.
I was going to add something to that. It was because you mentioned the in-between takes. I mean, I think it was probably comical for people on set because Sam would be being so incredibly horrible to me. And then we cut and he'd be like, making sure I'm okay and checking on me. And it was just a funny dichotomy, but we were able to kind of go in and out of that. But in particular, the desert house scenes, the crew was also sleeping there because we shot there for 2 days? 2 days. But so we had to sleep 3 days. We had to sleep in that bed that night. So it was just like, you stay on your side of the bed for this evening. I'm a little turned off. But yes.
Stephen, how did you, approach the tone of this film? Because it's dark, but it's funny sometimes. It's psychological, but at the same time, it deals with really real consequences of being in an abusive relationship. Can you talk about how you managed to strike this balance between the film's tonal shifts?
Damn, that's a hard question. I'll tell you right now, I don't know if I can answer it. But we'll see. I'll stumble through it. Yeah, the tone of it is really interesting. I feel like it's just it's a tone and a voice that tends to come out in a lot of my work, where it's simultaneously dark and serious, sometimes like overly serious, and at the same time you've got these comedic undertones, perhaps, that sometimes come through because of how gratuitous it all is. And I don't know, there's a link for me, and I think for a lot of people, in like horror and comedy, right? Even though they're opposite, there's somehow, they balance each other out, and they encourage each other, so what else?
That makes sense to me.
Yeah.
I can add to that.
I also feel like I feel like in Steven's work too, in the like darkest, most fucked up moments, if you like look over at him behind the camera, he's got just like this smile. And I think there's like something like it's like the type of stuff you like to watch is this type of stuff you like to make, kind of like, how uncomfortable can I make someone feel while watching this, and like exploring, what that reaction is. I mean, I think there were moments when we first saw the film with an audience that people like laughed out loud, and we didn't even realize like we needed people to laugh, because having people laugh kind of justified like, okay, yeah, this is the right tone, this is the right vibe for this. And I think that's like what you get out of it too, is like, oh, this is kind of funny.
Do you want to?
Yeah, no. Yeah, it just I think it feels good sometimes to kind of laugh at something that's so horrible. And I don't know. I think that's true for a lot of people. I think that's kind of human nature. Like sometimes it's so bad that all you can do is laugh.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
So this is a question for all of you, maybe. This film was made with a small cast, a very small crew. I know people wore multiple hats on set. It had a micro budget. That's your Jeep that Tom drives around in the movie, right? What lessons did any of you guys take away from this about the state of independent filmmaking right now?
Good question.
You want me to start? Yeah. Okay, well, I can talk specifically about my role on the film. Obviously, I'm Deb, but I was also the first AD on this film, which I work both professionally as an actor and an AD and a producer, all the hats. And so, yeah, we had to film all of my scenes in one day just to accommodate the rest of the shooting schedule, so I could wear my first AD hat for the rest of the shoot. And, luckily, Sam is also a wonderful producer and AD, and kind of took over that role on the day that I got to be an actor. And I was able to kind of hang up my AD hat, or I tried to, because, at the end of the day, I'm a control freak. And so I'm like, we're 4 minutes behind and this is my last take, whatever. But that was a challenge, because it was about 12 pages of just straight dialogue to a phone for me that we kind of just knocked out all in one day. Indie film. But I think it also kind of connected me to the film on a different level, because as the AD, I had to know it backwards and forwards, not just my part, but like how every interworking role played a part in the story. And I think that only helped me as an actor, to be honest. And, scheduling it and trying to help us make our days just made me care that much more. Not that I didn't already care, but I think that was like sort of the beauty of the film, where none of us were making a ton of money. It was all long, grueling days, but at the end of the day, we were making something we were really proud of with the people we love collaborating with most. And I think that is kind of the reason why you do it.
I'll add to that. I think like what we did only works if like Danielle said, people are passionate about what you're doing because otherwise it's just too hard. There's too much to do. The days are too long. And you also have to be committed to everything. So the only way that, a film like ours could be shot for the budget that we had, the amount of days we did it, is if everyone truly bought into it and said, I believe in this project. I think that my effort is worth it. And I'm going to give everything that I have and be exhausted at the end, because if people are just punching the clock on something like that, they're not going to give their all, and then we're not going to get what we had on screen. And I think the other thing is we're very fortunate in that we had such talented people doing everything, and people that are experienced enough that they're able to compartmentalize things and, like, she said, work on one thing for a while and then, all right, I'm going to do this other thing now and I'm going to stop. And then somebody else who is also good at that is going to take over. And, for me, being one of the producers on it, I was lucky in that my producing partner, Robert, who's behind the camera, was there to take over for me. And also I could trust Danielle to make sure that we're still running on time. And that's the other thing, is you have to be able to trust the people around you so that you can let go of one of your other hats and just focus on the thing you're doing at the time. Because if any part of your energy and your focus is still thinking about your other job, then you're not going to be as present, and then the job you're supposed to be doing in the moment isn't going to be done right. So, I think that those are probably the main reasons, I think, why we were able to do what we did and make something as good as we did, and get done on time, and wrap it out when we were supposed to. Steven, you want to add something?
As far as the current state of independent cinema, I think was the phrasing. I think I'll just look at the optimistic aspect of it, which is, I think it's so cool that a very small group of people, of friends, can come together with pretty minimal equipment, affordable equipment, easy to use, lightweight cameras. I was the director and the DP, and I pulled my own focus. And the lighting technology currently is amazing and so compact and so versatile. It's just I love that it doesn't take a lot. It takes a lot of talent, but as far as the logistics of bringing together enough equipment and a crew to make an indie movie, it's very doable for whoever wants to pursue that. So I think that's very cool.
Good message for the kids out there.
Yes.
Making movies, kids.
Yes.
Well, and that's maybe my last question. Ultimately, what do you hope that audiences take away from this film? And it's a question for all of you, too.
I can start if y'all don't mind.
Yeah.
I have a couple kind of thoughts on this, and I think it's especially interesting that this film is having its world premiere at a genre festival that a lot of horror movies are at, because this movie isn't really a horror movie. It has horror elements and obviously, psychological thriller aspects. But for me, working on this just made me realize how horrifying gaslighting and this kind of mental abuse can be. And I don't know that we treat emotional abuse with the same weight that we often do physical abuse. And so I think that's a major theme. And just that, gaslighting is torture. It to me reminds me of that little water drop on the middle of your forehead, the slow, feeling am I going crazy? This person's changing the way that your brain sees yourself and the world around you and everything like that. And I also think, kind of on the same token, grief is this huge, huge monster to tackle. And I think that for me, leaving the end of the film as Lily, I think about that last line in the movie, that I'm done crying. And I don't think that means that Lily's just magically better and never going to cry again. I think that, in my real life, I spent many years running away from my emotions and my grief. And there's kind of a turning point you reach where you're well, I can just keep running from this until it catches up to me, and then I won't be able to do anything about it. Or I can kind of turn around and face it head on. And to me, that was the decision that Lily made. It's I have a choice, and if I can tackle that guy, then I can tackle me, and I can tackle my grief and my pain. And so I think, obviously this movie has a lot of themes and elements going on, but to me that was a really important one, that people see that it's, even if you have pushed things off for many years, it's never too late to get help and take care of yourself. So yeah.
I think I hope that audiences have a lot of fun watching it. Ultimately, I think this genre of film, the reason why we like to work in it and why it's my preferred type of film to watch is because it's so freaking fun. And I think, so that's my number one. I hope you have fun. And I hope that it just like opens conversations, because I think there's a lot of different ways to look at. There is sort of the surface level sort of like horror thriller aspect of it where it's like, oh man, this like fucked up guy and that poor girl covered in blood, you know? But there's also, yeah, like the deeper level of about abuse and following your gut and when your instincts are wrong and when they're right. And so yeah, I think it should open up conversations and everyone can maybe take something a little bit different from the different moments. And make sure you always have your phone on Find My Friend so that no one gets lost in the desert.
Yes, that is something to remember. I think my two things, one of them's kind of similar to something you said. I think if you're seeing a series of red flags with someone, like, take notice, because there are a number of them here. And I think that's something that happens a lot with people is they convince themselves to ignore things that are right in your face, and your instincts are telling you like this person is trouble or it's a bad relationship, and you talk yourself out of it. So, please listen to what your instincts in your body and your intellect are telling you. And I think the other thing is I really wanted to make a movie that felt like it was as unique to the person watching it as possible, so that, in the same way that I don't want to tell anyone how to feel about anything specific, I don't want to necessarily inform anyone how they should feel watching it. So my hope is that people watching it have the experience that is unique to them in the way that they experience it. So if there's things that are hard in it and it provokes a discussion or they need some time to think, that's totally okay. If it's fun and silly and over the top to them, that's okay too. I don't think that there, in my mind, is a right or a wrong way to experience it. So I hope that, anybody watching this now and listening to us that's watched the film, and thank you for watching it, by the way, whatever your experience is and whatever you feel about watching it, just run with it and know that I encourage you to feel whatever you're feeling. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
okay.
Absolutely.
As I pass, add a little something.
Yeah.
I'm going to add as I pass to you. Oh, nothing to add? I just wanted to say, I think I'm glad you said that, because a couple people in my family that I've shown this to, some extended family members, watched this and had a completely different reaction and experience than anyone in our close kind of group that had seen it at the preview screening, but still loved it, but like hated my character, loved Sam, had like a whole other interpretation of what the meaning behind the film was. But they loved the movie and watched it 3 times. And I think it's really interesting. Of course, you have the story that you're telling, but that's the beautiful thing about film, is that it's so subjective, right? Like, you can watch it and have your own reaction. And so you are welcome to hate my character if you want to. I will support that.
You can't hate Deb, though. You can't hate Deb.
Deb is
Final
unhateable.
thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, you guys said it all. But yeah, just hope that it's 94 minutes of content that's like engaging, entertaining, thought-provoking, and that's all you can really ask for.
Yeah, there you go.
All right. Thank you so much for joining us for this Q&A with the cast and director and writer of TEARSUCKER, and we really hope that you enjoyed the film.
Thank
Thanks.
you. Thank you, Kristen.
Yay!